Month I came to the floor and called attention to a provision in the Consolidated Appropriations Act for fiscal year 2016. I would remind my colleagues, a 2,000-page omnibus bill that all of us had had approximately 48 hours to view before voting on yes or no. A provision specifically that I objected to, an egregious exercise of pork barrel parochialism, reversed reasonable restrictions on the Air Force's use of the Russian-made RD-180 rocket engine for national security space launches. I explained how that provision was secretly airdropped into the 2,000-page omnibus bill and overruled the authorizing committee. In other words, an outrageous overruling of the authorizing committee. They dropped this provision in the middle of this 2,000-page bill while we had had hearings, debate, discussion, markup, and debate on the floor of the United States Senate, which considered some 100 and some amendments. And so what we saw with this buried in this 2,000-page bill was a direct contradiction to the authorizing process. This process must stop. We have got to stop allowing the appropriators to make policy. That should come from the authorizing committee. And I want to tell my colleagues now, I will not stand for it any longer. Sometimes we wonder why the Americans are angry, why they're supporting Trump or Sanders or some outsider. Then all they have to do is look at this process we went through with this 2,000-page bill. It wasn't just the rocket engines. It was hundreds of millions of dollars in unnamed projects. It was $225 million for a ship that the Navy neither wants nor needs. By the way, the second one, we were supposed to build 10. So the appropriators, the senator from Alabama, adds, again, $225 million ship that the Navy neither wants nor needs, that is made and manufactured in Mobile, Alabama. We can't do that. It's got to stop. And of course, now they acted in a way that now provides tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars to Vladimir Putin and his corrupt cronies. How do you justify such action? The American taxpayers should be outraged to learn that some U.S. senators want American taxpayers to continue subsidizing Russian aggression and comrade capitalism. But those very senators thought that if they snuck their blank check to the Putin regime and into an unamendable, take it or leave it omnibus bill, that no one would stop them. I rise in the hope that Congress will prove them wrong. That's why I'll be joining with House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy to introduce legislation that would repeal this section of the omnibus bill and reassert the will of the Congress and the American people. It is morally outrageous and strategically foolish to ask American taxpayers to subsidize Russia's military-industrial base when Vladimir Putin, who the Treasury Department has reportedly accused of being personally corrupt, occupies Crimea, destabilizes Ukraine, menaces our NATO allies in Europe, violates the Intermediate-Range Nuclear Force Treaty, sends weapons to Iran, and bombs U.S.-backed forces in Syria to prop up the murderous regime of Bashar Assad, and all for the benefit of a rocket plant in Alabama. I won't go into too many details here except to point out that after the U.S. imposed sanctions against Russia in March 2014, Russian Deputy Prime Minister Dmitry Rogozin, who oversees the space industry in Russia, indicated several times that Russia expects that the U.S. will not use RD-180 engines for military launches and threatened to stop supplying them. Rogozin required, quote, "We're not going to deliver the RD-180 engines if the United States will use them for non-civil purposes. We also may discontinue servicing the engines that were already delivered to the United States." He also threatened to deactivate all GPS sites on Russian territory and ban U.S. astronauts from the International Space Station by 2020. Rogozin suggested that in the future, the United States should deliver its astronauts to the ISS with a trampoline. Later that year, Rogozin appeared to reconsider. After all, in order to design and build more rocket engines in Russia, Rogozin said, quote, "We need free money. This is why we are prepared to sell them, taking the sanctions very pragmatically." So, what are Russia's two desired outcomes? On the one hand, America continues its dependency on Russian rocket engines. On the other hand, America helps the Putin regime go around sanctions by getting free money for rocket engines. And this is who ULA and its congressional sponsors want us to do business with? At the same time, Russia has threatened to cut off supply. Energomash has pursued other business opportunities with other countries that would give Russia a freer hand in making good on its threats, most notably China. In July 2015, President Putin signed a new law that consolidated the Russian space industry under a single state corporation, an entity called Corporation Roscosmos. This was done to enhance the power of the Russian government to better implement state space policy and control of the space industry. He signed an order that will effectuate this law. In addition, Putin appointed Igor Komarov, chief executive of the newly created corporation Cosmos. Komarov is former chairman of one of Russia's largest car maker and advisor to Sergei Chemzov. Chemzov, who was also appointed to the board, is said to have served as a KGB officer with Vladimir Putin in Germany back in the 1980s, and he has been targeted by our sanctions. Under the same order, Putin also appointed Russia's Deputy Prime Minister Dmitry Rogozin, and the list goes on and on. So why do you want U.S. taxpayers sending millions of dollars to the Russian government when Vladimir Putin occupies Crimea, destabilizes Ukraine, etc., etc.? And to add insult to injury, this last year, on the defense bill, we had to legislate to stop the United States Defense Department from giving $800 million per year to ULA. That's the outfit that now launches with using Russian rockets, ULA, with Russian rocket engines. We had to prohibit the continued payment of $800 million a year. They were paying them to stay in business. It is amazing. I figured out roughly since 2006, we have paid this ULA, which is a combination of Boeing and Lockheed Martin, that we have paid them some $7 billion to stay in business. It used to be called the military-industrial complex that Eisenhower warned us about when he was leaving office. It is now the military-industrial congressional complex that puts in a 2,000-page bill a requirement to build a $225 million ship that nobody wants, that the Navy doesn't need, for the second year in a row. That's $450 million of your tax dollars that went to build two ships that the Navy neither needs nor wants. My friends, do you wonder about the cynicism of the American people? Do you wonder why they think that what we're doing business in Washington is corrupt? When we spend $450 million in 2 years on two ships the Navy doesn't want or need? When we subsidize a outfit, the only one that until recently that does space launches, pay them $800 million a year to stay in business, to spend hundreds of millions on unspecified scientific programs, to take hundreds of millions of dollars from medical research that has nothing to do with defense and take it out of defense. Why would we wonder that the American people are angry and frustrated? Look at what we're doing with their tax dollars I don't know if it was 48 or 72 hours that we had to vote up or down up or down on a 2,000-page, $1.1 trillion document. No amendments allowed. And so I say to my colleagues, do not wonder, do not be curious why they're out there flocking to the banner of Senator Sanders, the only announced socialist in the United States Senate, and on the other side, people like Donald Trump, who have never had anything to do with Washington, D.C. They should not be surprised. Well, all I can say to my colleagues is that I'm not going to stop, because I owe the people of Arizona a lot better than what we're giving them. We owe them an accountability of why we would spend $800 million a year to keep a company in business. We owe them an explanation why we would, over the last 2 years, spend $450 million for 2 ships that the Navy neither wants nor needs because they're made in Mobile, Alabama. We owe them a lot better than our performance on this omnibus appropriations bill. Now, I'll be glad to talk more about how each individual was blocked by the other side who would not agree to moving forward and the rules of the Senate and all that. But that really doesn't make much difference at the Rotary Club. What makes a difference is that we've wasted billions of dollars of their tax dollars that were neither wanted nor needed, nor ever had a hearing, in the authorizing committee. I'm proud of the work we do on the Armed Services Committee. We have literally a hearing every day. We spend hours and hours and hours in markups of debate and discussion on these various programs. We have hearings with administration officials. We have hearings at the subcommittee. I am so proud of the bipartisan approach that we take to our defense authorization bill, working closely with Senator Reid and my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. And I'm proud of the product after literally thousands of hours of testimony, of study, of voting, and all of that. And then we get a 2,000-page omnibus appropriations bill stuffed with billions of dollars of projects that we never, ever would consider in the authorizing committee. So the system is broken. The system is broken, and it better be fixed. And I am telling my colleagues, especially those on the Appropriations Committee, this will not stand. I yield the floor.